This episode has been brought to you in part by Audit Shield. Audit Shield is a fully managed solution that helps CPAs across Canada recover professional fees when clients face CRA reviews, audits, or investigations. It's optional for your clients, free for your firm, and ensures you don't write off valuable time. Thousands of CPAs already rely on Audit Shield to protect their clients and their bottom line. With CRA scrutiny rising, it's quickly becoming a must-have.
Welcome to our AJAG PD Pod, the place for discussion, debate, and learning about all things accounting. Our hosts, Ivan Tabak, Jonathan Tucker, are CPAs that have been in practice for more than 3 decades. Together, they bring varying experience and viewpoints to the table, not to mention a little humor, too. Join us as we talk through current issues and hot topics, tap into expert guest insights, and enjoy the odd walk down AJAG memory lane. Before we begin today's podcast, please note, although the educational material within the podcast has been carefully prepared, none of the persons involved in the preparation of the material accepts any legal responsibility for its contents or for any consequences arising from its use. As well, the podcast material and the references contained therein may reflect laws and practices that are subject to change. Advice regarding a particular fact or situation should always be reviewed by a qualified professional. This podcast is produced and distributed by AJAG Professional Development. For more information about AJAG or any of its offerings, please visit ajag.ca.
Today we're joined by Marcus Guenther from FocusHGK LLP. He's the author of the former CPA Canada's Quality Management Manual to discuss why practice inspections are getting tougher and why so many firms are falling short on the new CSQM standards. If you want to dive deeper into this, you can also register for his live Q&A session on August 26th or sign up and watch both of his August sessions on demand at the end of this month. So, Marcus, welcome back.
Great, thank you.
And another fascinating topic for us to discuss, but a topic that's causing, especially small practitioners, a lot of stress. And this came to mind when I saw an email come in from CPA Ontario talking about how many firms are failing their practice inspections in regards to the new quality assurance manual that's required, and in them following the standards required for it. So we wanted to get your input and just have a broad overview of what the issue is, why these standards were put into place, and what firms need to do and how to do it to get compliant.
Okay. So do you feel something's changed? Like, does it feel different compared to if somebody that's done compilations for a long time?
It does feel different because I don't know about you, but just having the requirement for this manual and knowing that they're looking for more or looking more closely,
and not knowing,
hanging over a head,
not
to
knowing
me it is. Yeah.
What practice inspection is going to be asking for is another question. It's one thing to have these, but then, all right, so what are those questions? What are we going to have to provide that's different?
Yeah. Or is this, or in the end, is this just, another checklist that we're just, running, checking it off as all the way down the page, knowing that this is stuff we're already doing. But I think it goes a little beyond.
We used to,
beyond that.
When we did assurance work, we had a quality assurance manual. You had one, I had one, we follow it. We were used to that. But then when compilations came along, it's like, all right, well, then no longer needed. And we got away from that. And now it's back.
Right. So the two things that have changed things dramatically are the old quality assurance standard, the CSQC one, the control standard, the one we came out in 2010. That would have been the quality assurance manual that we had way back when, right? So that was a different time in the sense that was only subject to assurance firms. If you did compilations, like at least you're familiar with the concept.
Yeah.
But if you only did compilations, you've never needed a manual up until this point. So that's what caught people by surprise.
Yeah.
They thought, oh, well, I'm just going to download this manual. I'm going to change the name to my firm name and just call it a day.
Yeah.
It's not quite that easy. So that's the one thing that's changed dramatically, and I'll get into that in a second. And the other one is just the base standard before, right? You had the 9000 series, NTRs.
Yeah.
If you filled in the 2 checklists that they were looking for, you had an engagement letter in the file, you could pretty much put that, I wouldn't say on anything, obviously with some caveats, but you could put that into almost anything.
Was there a bank reconciliation done, right?
That was so that's changed. So the combination of a whole new quality management standard plus there's now a new compilation standard that people that are going through these inspection cycles now haven't necessarily been through yet, is catching people by surprise because it has a bunch of different concepts. But if you kind of start with its manual, it's not just a manual. They refer to it as a system of quality management.
Yeah.
Right. Because really what we're saying is it's not just that the manual is part of that.
Yeah.
But what you need to demonstrate is how you got from in the standard to the policies you have. So on a base level, you start with objectives, the opposite of an objective. Like let's just say the objective is Jonathan Tucker's firm cares about quality. The risk is that it doesn't.
Right.
So what's the chance of that happening? So we look at some risks, and then we have a policy to say, okay, we're going to,
how do we address
how do we address this? And then we have to monitor that, because having a policy is great. But the standard setters learned from the last time. Yeah. And last time, if you just changed the name on your manual, put it on the shelf, and once every 3 years before the inspection, you looked at it and make sure you changed the date.
Yeah.
Most people didn't touch it. Now it's saying, no, that can't be. You're supposed to do, you had to do annual monitoring before, but it wasn't as rigorous. Now you're saying, obviously some small differences, but if you have 30 policies in your manual, you should be monitoring those 30 policies.
So just before we go more into it, how did we get here? Like because I'm sure there's a lot of people watching going, what's going on with this? That this doesn't make sense. But in the bigger scheme of things, how did we get here? Why is this now in force?
Because I think they wanted, if you go back to the mandate of let's just say the different provincial bodies, they're in charge of training and whatnot. But one of the key things they're trying to do is to ensure quality and to protect the public interest.
And is that part of Canada being in a bigger context? I mean, other accounting bodies throughout the world are saying this is what we're expecting of member countries, or is that
correct? So typically, what happens is the international standard setters sit on their own bodies and they discuss relevant issues. And audit quality is a big topic.
Yeah.
You've had a number of high-profile failures, so that's the thing that damages the public interest.
But this is an audit.
Exactly. So you say, well, Marcus, it does, but it always waters down. So things that happen in an audit standard wind their way into review standard, and things that are in the review standard, they trickle down into compilations.
But I think what people would have difficulty with is the report that we put on compilations basically says we haven't done anything. So why is there now this obligation to go through and follow each of these policies when the compilation engagement report says I haven't reviewed, audited, or otherwise attempted to
correct.
So they want to document the process of
not doing anything.
Yeah.
Well, it's if I look at it a little differently, if you look at the old standard, the old compilation standard, there was nothing like the NTR.
Yeah. Other than you wouldn't be associated with anything that was false or misleading, you had to have an objective state of mind. And
correct. So practical example.
Yeah.
But before you had your classic NTR statement, and then some people asked you for some kind of schedules or other things that you prepared. And people typically, if they prepared other kinds of schedules for a bank or another investor, they would put a notice to reader on top of it to disassociate themselves in the information.
Right.
Well, now you can't do that. You have the new compilation standard, which defines what a compilation is and what it isn't. It isn't bookkeeping. It isn't evaluation. It isn't a projection, because that's in a different standard. And so what you're doing is you're basically, based on the information provided by management, you're assisting them with providing information in accordance with a disclosed basis of accounting. That's, in my opinion, a much higher standard of care than the old standard. So that kind of...
Because you're tagging it to something now, a disclosed basis of accounting.
Because if it's not in the disclosed, you can still be at risk. You're saying, I haven't audited the information, I haven't reviewed it.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, because you have to do that at the end of the standard, to say, I'm comfortable to say that, it's in accordance with that basis of accounting. So that gives a higher standard. And then I think also the other shift from what I see from standard setters, and again, it comes down from the PCAOB, the CPAP, So the public accountability boards that look at public companies, you say, well, Marcus, I don't do audits, let alone public companies.
Yeah.
But that mentality, or call that theme, goes all the way down to say, what we really like to do is not come in every 3 years and audit a bunch of files and infer what quality is. We'd like to look at, Ivan and Jonathan's quality processes to get some comfort as to whether all the engagements would have that level of quality. So in the future,
this is almost internal control.
Exactly. So it's almost like internal control reliance.
Yeah.
So a public company has to sign, in the U.S., has to sign basically an internal controls report. Yeah. And there's some serious consequences for signing that if it's not true, by negligence or it's not to be true and you sign it anyway.
Yeah.
So the provincial bodies and the national bodies are focusing on the best way I can protect my public interest is to make sure that all the firms have a level of quality that's documented and stuff. So in the future, the hope is that they'll put more emphasis on quality management systems, less on inspecting files and inferring what the quality is. At least that's the theory.
So, Jason, since today's episode is all about CSQM, where do you see Audit Shield fitting into this?
Well, Audit Shield doesn't replace a solid CSQM framework, but it does act as a strong safety net when gaps happen to slip through. So I've got a quick story that shows exactly what I mean.
Go ahead.
Well, this one in particular, Jonathan, really stuck with me. Now, a firm's client was flagged for a CRA review, your typical GST, HST filings. Now, that, as I say, is typical. But what was very interesting in this case was the high level of anxiety that came with it. The problem? Inconsistent procedures, of course, missing documentation. So the CRA was asking for multiple years of records, as you know, internal emails, even explanations for specific tax treatments. And you can imagine the amount of scrambling that was done by the firm to fulfill on what the CRA was looking for. Bottom line is Audit Shield ended up covering the just over $5,300 of professional time invested in having to respond to that specific request from the CRA. But really what this was a wake-up call for that firm, right? Without these standardized systems in place, they were really exposed.
Yeah.
So you could say that CSQM readiness isn't just like one of those out-of-the-box or box-ticking exercise. It really is the importance of making sure there's real protection in place for your practice.
Well, if that's not a case for getting your house in order, I don't know what is, and avoiding unexpected bills. They had Audit Shield behind them.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jason, how can people reach you?
Jason at accountancyinsurance.ca or Google Audit Shield Canada and send us a message.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Jason.
So why don't we, just get into more of a, we'll say, in a practical sense, what do firms who haven't begun to deal with this, where do they start? What do they need to look at? What type of information would they need to, provide to you, for example, as someone who could help them put the manual together? Not, I don't want to get into too many details, but just, on a big picture.
So usually what happens is people start to panic when they get that list from the inspection,
right?
Basically saying, here's the documents you need to upload. So the first thing the key three things in this context they ask for are documentation related to your system of quality management, results of your annual policy monitoring, and the last cyclical inspection report. So most compilation firms have had neither of those last two inspection reports, so they have no idea what an annual or cyclical monitoring is. Let's start with the system quality management. You have to upload to them or demonstrate to them how you assess risk. So if you use some software, I know it used to be called Overnear, they just changed the name. So CPA Canada has published some software that takes you through that. You go through each of the objectives and the standard, it populates some risks for you. You look at those risks, and
this is for the manual
to come up with policies. So my own opinion, and that part of that is because Stuart and I wrote the original manual. Firms are comfortable with a manual, right? So just because the standards change, firms still at some point want a manual because they can hand that to an inspector, they can hand that to a reviewer like me or somebody else or a staff member, and say, okay, these following sections apply to you. If you have a piece of, like what happens with some of the software is, you have a piece of software that has the objectives, the risks, the risk assessment, the policy, and all of that, but there's not. You can put the report.
Together, right?
It looks like an Excel spreadsheet. So do you give your, a junior staff or intermediate staff member that you're saying as part of your annual certification of compliance with firm policies?
Yeah.
If you give that to a junior bookkeeping staff or somebody that maybe helps you on some other stuff, and you say, I'd like you to sign that you comply with all the firm policies, they're going to say, well, I haven't shown me the firm policies. If you give them a 6-page spreadsheet that looks like the wiring diagram for an airplane, they're going to say, I'm not signing this. I have no idea what any of this means. Right? So a manual.
Or they'll sign it and it's meaningless.
Yeah. So a manual is the output of a risk assessment process. So you need to demonstrate that. So I know I've worked with you on some worksheets to document how we get from an objective to a risk. And you say, well, is it that complicated? Yes, it is. A compilation firm yesterday, right? CSQM 1-60, basically says, what is the retention period for your system of quality management? Where can I see that in your policies? Like they're that detailed. So that's why I make you go through all of the objectives. Yeah. So you need that. Then you need to take those policies and put them into a manual. Now, I know it sounds easy, but if you look at your old manual before, it has to flow. Right. So it has to feel it has an index, and you have to then differentiate between policies and how you're going to do something. So a policy is, Ivan's going to review all these working papers and sign them, right? Or somebody, or all the reviews and working papers. Who's going to look after that? Who's going to make sure it gets done is another piece, which is implementation.
So I'm just looking at the quality manual or management manual now, and the topics that are covered: governance and leadership. What does that have to do with compilation engagements? Relevant ethical requirements. Okay, that makes sense. Client acceptance. So these are the types of issues that you're taking people through in a manual that will cover off these risks.
Correct. So it links directly back to the objective. So there's 8 components in the standard. So governance basically is tone of the top. How much does, for example, your firm? I know it's easy when you're by yourself or very small. Yeah. But the standard wasn't written for you. Yeah. The standard, in my opinion, because I work with some national firms, it's hard for them to implement this when you have a firm with 100 countries in the picture. Yeah. And it's very difficult for a firm of one partner with one staff member. Yeah. Right. So it's meant to be in the middle. So for the most part, it makes more sense if it's 3 or 4 partners and you're full service, a lot of the policies make sense. My biggest challenge has been trying to dwindle this down to something that covers the basis but makes sense in a sentence.
What if you're a sole practitioner and you've got 6 or 7 staff? Can you, and maybe one's a CPA, can you assign that responsibility, or at the end of the day it still comes back to me?
So technically speaking, the way the wording in the standard is you as the managing partner, will assign you that role, has the ultimate responsibility for the system of quality management, which you can assign to what I call a head of quality management. So you can delegate that to Ivan if you like, right? And then Ivan basically will do that and report back to you. And then in your annual evaluation, you're going to say, well, based on the work that Ivan's done and the reports that he's given me, I think our system quality management works. So technically, you can assign it to somebody.
You better make sure your insurance is paid up if you want to go to me.
So realistically, what happens a lot of the times is because the look on your face is like most practitioners look at me, what are you talking about? Right. So I'm saying at least in the first or second year, let me do the monitoring, so then at least you understand what's the difference, how has it been done, what are my conclusions, because when I upload it, it has to all make sense. And we can get into more of that detail and sort of the bigger session.
So and just there's you're throwing out a lot of words about objectives and the policies, etc. And I'm sure people the same way when we first talked about it, what started going through mine, I said, well, like, how am I supposed to put this together? How am I supposed to answer these questions? Like, I have no clue. But just for anybody watching who's thinking, the person who is helping you, in my case, it was Marcus, it's all laid out. We have an initial discussion to fill out a questionnaire. They ask, how do you handle this? How do you handle that? And then that information is taken, put into a document as a first draft. And then, with some back and forth, cleaning it up, making sure the answers are complete and consistent.
And workable.
Yeah. So, personally, there is no way I would ever myself have been able to sit down and do this, just because I wouldn't really have an understanding of what these questions really are asking and how to answer them.
And the breadth of it.
And so that, so I guess just to get everybody at ease, there are people out there that will help you do this.
Yeah.
So,
but it's not
panic.
It's not a one-page document. I mean, no, this line is 35, 36 pages long, right? And it covers the whole gamut of the things that go on in my practice. And I'll be interested to see, because as we evolve, we've been talking in other podcasts about AI. AI doesn't come into here. So I can only imagine now that we're going to have to be thinking about risks in our practice. Where does AI fit into this?
I had that discussion with a firm this morning, 4-partner firm, does assurance and whatnot. And I said, one of the topics, I do some in-house training for them.
Yeah.
One of the topics is going to be, and it hasn't hit yet, because it has to, generally with a regulator, it has to blow up first. Then somebody gets egg on their face. Now we need a regulation, and then we come back and do it. So I said to them, you probably don't want to wait for that. So I guarantee your staff are already using AI, Pilot or ChatGPT or any other that. Do you know what they're using it for? If they're putting in client information, if you're using it to write emails on confidential issues, or using it for tax research, right? Do you know what they're doing?
Yeah.
Right. And that's part of it's actually in the standard.
Yeah. Or do you know where those?
Because that's called an intellectual resource.
Yes.
Right. So do you know what intellectual resources the firm uses? So does your firm, for example, sanction Copilot? Do you know what it uses? Are you comfortable from a data security point of view? What are they feeding it?
Yeah.
Right. Because you can get an answer. The problem with that is, if you think about it from a control thing, you know the input you gave it, and you know the output, but you don't know what's happening in the middle, because you're not going to get a service auditor's report like you do for ADP, for example, from an AI company. Yeah. So the standard setters are trying to get their heads around that. But that's be one of the policies that isn't in your manual yet, but it will be once we figure out what you need.
We have drafted an AI policy.
Yeah.
So if folks want to take a look at a draft version of it, feel free to ask. But it's, I think that's got to be one of the most pressing issues for firms now, because staff are already using this.
They're already using
it.
Yeah.
So we get the manual, and then what about implementation?
So so the implementation is the next piece, which then says, okay, you have these policies. Let's pick one that everybody loves, because I know you love this one. Archiving, right?
Yeah.
So you have that.
Yeah, I saw that section, and I
think your comment was, "Are you serious?"
Yeah.
Let's pick archiving within 60 days. Okay, what are we archiving? Are we going to lock the case for a file? Are we going to print to a PDF? What is being archived, right? So if I said, this is my archive file to comply with my firm policy of 60 days, as part of CSQM1, what is it we're archiving? How do you, so that's the implementation is, let's decide on what we're archiving, who's going to make sure it gets done, and where do we document the date? So do we document the date on a typing a control sheet? Do we have something else to make sure it gets done? Because what happens is when I come now back at the end of the year and do the monitoring, or you do the monitoring, you're going to pick a file and make sure it was locked down in accordance with the firm policy.
Whatever that is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So now you can say, okay, well, I've checked to make sure that, we archive the PDF version. The PDF version contained the following documents.
Yes.
And I know what date it was done on.
Yes. And Marcus, really, when you think about this, it's not
rocket science.
It's not rocket science.
No.
It's not that particularly impractical. It's good to have a PDF of the final product, a published version of it versus an unpublished version, which can just sit in a file. So, as you look at it, it seems more daunting But
everything is like any change.
No, you're right.
But the thing that you just got to always keep in mind, and this is why I spend a lot of time with you, is to make sure the policies are as close to what you're doing already.
Yeah.
Then there's no implementation problems, right? So if you haven't been archiving because you didn't have to do that before, okay, that's new.
Yeah.
But a lot of the other things like client acceptance and continuance, well, you've filled in those checklists for years, right, in terms of how we're going to do it. And, you probably don't get that many complicated independence issues on compilation engagements, but it's a matter of just having the policies.
What are people having difficulty with? What is new in this that we're all struggling, or that's new, not necessarily struggling, but is a change in our process?
So the lockdown is one. Right. The whole monitoring process to compilation firms is new.
Yeah.
So they've never had policies before, so they had no requirement to monitor annual policies.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So that is new. And in the templates, it isn't that it isn't that well done.
The one with the release.
Yeah.
Right. I think that was a new concept.
Yeah. So
signing off on the final.
Yeah. So and then there's other things in a probably larger, bigger discussion, but when you go through an inspection or when a monitor looks at something, they want to look at key dates. So the key dates in a file is obviously the day you started it, because technically near the date you started it, you should have had an engagement letter, right? So the day you start the engagement, then you get to the compilation report date.
Yeah.
Then you have the compilation engagement report release date, and then you have your lockdown date. So even though you may have 60 days from the report date to the lockdown, in between there, you released it. Now, it could be close to what the report date is for most smaller firms, right?
Yeah.
But the general feeling is once you've released the statement, you can't really be doing your review, for example, right? Like if you sign off and review the file after you've released it, an inspector that's watched the dates will say, hang on a second, Ivan, you released the report and reviewed the file later. Yeah. That's not right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they'll call you out on it.
Yeah.
So
what is locked down? Is it the client package? Is it the client package and your working papers?
The entire working paper. So basically to say what supports this particular report. So it would be the engagement letter, the management acknowledgement letter if you have it, or some other form, all the checklists, all the documentation that supports that engagement. So if
no
you
tax-related stuff.
No tax-related stuff, because that's outside of the scope of the standard.
Yeah.
But emails, to the extent that they pertain to a specific issue, sure, PDF it and put it in or something, right? But that sometimes becomes an issue, because some firms will say, well, a signed copy of the statement goes in this filing cabinet.
Right.
A signed engagement letter goes in this cabinet. Well,
right.
you can't lock down something that's in 4 places.
Right.
So somebody will say, well, you have to assemble that. So if your policy is to keep signed copies in certain things in different file folders, you have to scan it.
Right.
And make sure it's in an electronic copy, or make a copy of it's a paper copy.
Right. What about you? Have you found any new steps in your process?
Just what was discussed, really.
What about knowledge of the client's business? Is there anything in there?
Well, that we've been doing for the past few years.
Yeah.
So nothing really changed
for you,
as far as I know. With that, we still document, as much as we can. But it was locking down the documents and then making sure to document the release date as well. That was. Something different. Other than that, there really wasn't much or any change in what I was doing. And again, I think it all comes down, this issue is creating the standards and creating the manual or the procedures, documenting your procedures and the standards, and then having to, get somebody to help you with it and then monitor it. They're layering on top of what, for the most part, what's already been done, as long as, of course, you've been doing it properly up until now.
Yeah, and part of the issue of doing this is making sure you get it as close to what you want, what you should be doing as possible. So the problem with any template is, if you take another firm's manual or risk assessment templates, or you pick up one of the software providers like CPA Canada's manual, Oveneer. It's called something different now, but I've forgotten the name because it recently changed. It comes up with a bunch of standard policies and standard risks and stuff. And the tendency is to just start populating it all and just say, okay, let's hit it.
There we go. Yeah.
The problem is you have stuff in there to say, let's just say, for example, you put in the standard policy is there is you're going to do a formal performance evaluation on every professional staff member that you have. Right. Well, Marcus is going to come in or somebody's going to come at the end of the year and saying, show them to me. Yeah. And you're like, well, I don't do that. Yeah. Mine are verbal. Well, then why do we have a policy that says we do formal written performance evaluations? Well, it was in the template. So that just causes trouble, right? So you have to make sure that it's as close as possible to what it is you're actually doing, right? So if you use contractors, we have a different policy, right? Because you're going to want to get them to, for example, have a signed engagement letter. That engagement letter covers confidentiality because that's in the standard. So even for compilation practice, they will ask you, for example, how do you ensure that, because you're required to show that your staff have signed something about confidentiality. Now you come to me and say, well, Marcus has worked for me for 20 years. I don't have an employment contract. I'll say, well, that's fine. I don't need an employment contract, but we have to get Marcus to sign a confidentiality waiver or agreement so that when you do the annual confirmation, then you have something to base on.
Yeah. I'm remembering back to the old quality assurance manual where I think the analogy or the example was the office cleaner who came in and, was cleaning and there were files sitting on the desk. And had they actually got the cleaner to sign a confidentiality agreement because they would see what's
but you know what led to that, right?
Or your IT contractor looking at files what led to that? What?
It was nothing at the time that the manual was written. It was 2010. Okay. I believe one of the reasons that kind of those discussions came up is because there were people posing as cleaners that went into law firms and used to rifle through desks to get a head start on transactions.
Wow.
Right. So it was not the person cleaning your desk that you're worried about, moving the papers. It was the person that wasn't really there to clean. They were listening to see, what deals is Jonathan working on? Right. And can I get in front of that deal? Right. Right. So, but you're right. I mean, it's
these things force us to think about those other relationships as well, right? So,
especially contractors. So employees, I think people realize you need an employment agreement or you should probably have one or something about confidentiality. But what if you hire contractors, bookkeepers, for example, on a contract basis, or let's just say, okay, the manual doesn't have to cover tax, but let's just say you have a tax consultant that you do some more complicated tax planning with. How do you know that they keep that client confidential, that information?
And the other issue with contractors is how are they protecting the data that's on their computers? Because often, they'll do, they'll have their QuickBooks file or whatever it is, and then and then forward you reports or the file itself. What's the retention policy and of those files on their computer?
And people look at it as kind of like, who cares? But it's that kind of stuff that also protects you. So I've had 3 or 4 clients that have had data breaches, cyber attacks. And one of the things the insurance company will look for is what policies and procedures and what safeguards did you have and did those safeguards work as part of assessing their claim, because they're potentially, that could impact it. So if you say, well, I had these policies and they conclude that you've done the best job you could, but somebody got in anyway. That's a much better position to be in than to say, well, that's a great point. I should maybe have
should have thought of that.
I should have thought of that.
Yeah. So for us, for example, somebody can only work on a file through our server or like our environment, right? You wouldn't send a caseware file or a QuickBooks file. You can only access through our virtual.
So it makes it helps justify the case for you not hiring the contractor directly, you connecting them with your client and have your client hire them directly. So it's your client's responsibility and not
except
yours.
if your clients makes their way into your client files because they send you something that has a QuickBooks file
Yes, that's true too.
And now you could be completely exposed. So
yeah, but there's a lot more to consider now, right?
Yes.
So if you're a compilation firm, you never had a system quality management documentation before, so that's we could spend the next 2 hours talking about that.
Yeah.
Then you have the annual monitoring. Well, what's involved in that? Do I need to issue a report? Yes. What comes up? What's the outcome of that?
When you say are you talking about the practitioner, or are you talking about
the practitioner, or whoever the monitor is? So technically, you can do your own monitoring.
Yeah.
If you know what you should be, because as part of the S2E7 documentation, you should have monitoring procedures.
Yeah.
So you could theoretically do those.
Yeah.
And then do them yourself. Well, it's always better if somebody external does it, because generally, it's a second check. But you can do it yourself.
Yeah.
But then the output of that is not just some scratch, handwriting. It should be a report.
Yeah.
That's saying, here's what we found. We didn't find anything, and here's what we checked.
Yeah.
And then out of that is an annual evaluation to say, based on my annual monitoring, this is what that, to your point, that head of the head of the firm would say is there's only 3 outcomes. Yeah. Either we had no findings and everything's wonderful. We had some findings, but they weren't significant enough to for us to worry about. So our system still works, or it failed. Yeah. So kind of in a control test, if you go back to that control theory, either have a test with no failures that the test still passes, or the test failed. Yeah. So that's your annual, and then
what happens when you fail? What happens when you fail your own test? Or
thankfully I haven't had anybody where it's been so serious because you all run successful firms, so it's not like you don't have any policies. Yeah. This wasn't documented, or this kind of didn't work the way we thought it would work. But I haven't run into a firm yet that had such poor controls they had no idea what was going out the door. That doesn't happen.
Yeah. So but let's say hypothetically, you failed yourself, right? And then you have to provide that documentation for an inspection.
Okay. So the next piece that goes with it is you do your annual monitoring, you do your annual evaluation that says, I didn't do very well. Yeah. Okay. The next thing I would ask you for is your action plan, which you should do anyway, to say, okay,
to fix it.
I'm going to address these following issues on this timeline, and who's responsible for that. Yeah. And when's it going to be done, right? Because then that gives even the firms that, everybody thought, okay, Marcus, you found a bunch of stuff. This is going to look really bad to an inspector. Right. I'm like, not really. If we back it up with, okay, we're going to fix this by this time, technically, it's shows in the system's working, right? Yeah. We put some policies in place. They didn't work very well. Yeah. And now we're going to fix, we're going to address these things going forward. So it's still okay. Yeah. Like they won't fail you just because you failed yourself. Yeah. Yeah. Right. They will if those issues still persist at the time you're being inspected, because then, you haven't complied with the standards. So, yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Marcus. Don't miss our live Quality Management Unplugged Q&A on August 26th, or the on-demand version that'll be released later in the month. You can register now at ajag.ca to make sure your firm is ready for its next inspection. And wrap up another fascinating podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks, everyone.